Imagine for a moment that what we call problems don't actually exist. We create them. They are stories we tell ourselves, stories about how the world should be. But who is to say how anything should be? What if life is exactly as it needs to be in this moment, and the discomfort we feel is simply a reflection of our own resistance to the flow of things? You see, life doesn't deal in problems. Life just is. It moves like a river, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent. The river doesn't struggle against its course, it simply follows. But we, with our minds, try to carve out a separate path, thinking we know better, and in doing so, we create tension. That tension becomes what we call a problem. We spend so much time trying to solve these problems, forgetting that they are inventions of our own making. The real issue is not the situation, but our resistance to it. When we stop resisting, the so-called problem dissolves. It doesn't need solving because there's nothing wrong to begin with. If you change the way you see things, suddenly the landscape shifts. What you once saw as an obstacle becomes part of the journey. What you feared becomes something to embrace. The very idea of a problem loses its power over you. When we allow life to unfold without judgment, we stop labeling things as problems or solutions. There is just this moment as it is. The river flows, and so do you. In that flow, you find peace not because you've escaped problems, but because you've realized they were never really there in the first place. You've been part of the flow all along. What we call problems are, in reality, not part of the external world. They are mental constructs, creations of the mind that arise from our attempts to organize, control, and label life. Think about it for a moment. When something happens, it just happens. Events occur, things move, people act. It's only when we bring our judgments, our preferences, and our ideas about how things should be that we start calling something a problem. The problem isn't in the event itself, but in the way we frame it with our minds. Consider a rainy day. To some, it's a blessing, a chance for the earth to be nourished, for the air to be cleansed. To others, it's an inconvenience, something that ruins plans or brings discomfort. The rain didn't change, only the way it was perceived did. The so-called problem lies not in the rain, but in the mind's decision to see it as such. In our daily lives, we do this constantly. A situation arises, and before we even allow ourselves to fully experience it, our mind rushes in to define it as a problem, or not a problem. But this is all arbitrary, based on the stories we've told ourselves about how life is supposed to go. We cling to expectations, and when reality doesn't align with them, we label it a problem. Yet, if you look deeply, the situation itself is neutral. It simply is. It's our mind, through its conditioning and its need to categorize, that turns it into something problematic. Life doesn't deal in problems or solutions. Life simply unfolds moment by moment, like the steady, unhurried flow of a river. It moves with a natural rhythm, constantly changing, adapting, growing, and yet we often see life as something to be fixed, controlled, or overcome. We imagine there's something wrong with it, something that needs our intervention, as though we need to impose our will upon it to make it right. But the truth is, life is already perfect in its unfolding. Every moment, with all its beauty and chaos, its calm and turbulence, is exactly as it needs to be. The river doesn't stop to ask, is this the right direction? Should I flow faster here, slower there? It simply flows. And this flow is life itself, nothing more, nothing less. When we start viewing life as a series of problems to be solved, we're missing the point entirely. We believe we need to fix things to make them go our way, to force them into a shape we find comfortable. But life doesn't need fixing. It is not broken. It doesn't need to conform to our ideas of what it should be. When we let go of the illusion that life must be controlled, we start to see it for what it is, a dynamic, ever-changing process, beautiful in its unpredictability. The tension we feel when we encounter what we call problems arises not from the situation itself, but from our resistance to it. Life, in its natural state, is fluid, always moving, shifting, adjusting. It flows with the grace of a dance, yet we often find ourselves at odds with that flow. We stand in opposition, trying to control, to shape, to mold it into something more comfortable, more familiar. And in that very resistance, the tension is born. When we resist the present moment, we create friction. We say to life, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't how it should be, but the moment has already arrived in its fullness, in its perfection. By refusing to accept it as it is, we cause ourselves unnecessary struggle. We imagine that we need to battle the circumstances, to bend them to our will, when in truth, life is simply inviting us to go with the flow. Resistance is not just a mental action, it's a physical one as well. It contracts us, makes us tense, closes off from the natural rhythm of things. But the moment we drop that resistance, the tension evaporates. The so-called problem no longer feels like a battle, but like part of the unfolding dance of life. So, the real issue isn't the situation you face, it's the way you meet it. Do you meet it with open arms or with clenched fists? Are you willing to experience life as it comes, or are you trying to push against its current? When you stop resisting the present moment, something remarkable happens. The world begins to reveal itself in a way you never thought possible. The very things you once labeled as problems become part of the natural unfolding of life, like pieces of a puzzle that were always meant to fit together. It's as if you've been wearing a pair of glasses that tinted everything you saw with fear, anxiety, and judgment. When you remove those glasses, suddenly the world looks different. Acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It's not about giving up or passively allowing life to steamroll over you. No, acceptance is the recognition that things are as they are, and they don't need to be anything else. The rain falls, the sun rises, the seasons change, and in each moment there is nothing to fix, because the present moment is always whole, always complete, exactly as it is. The more you resist, the more you struggle, the more you push against life. And in that struggle, you create an illusion of problems, things that need to be solved or avoided. But when you accept the moment as it is, without judgment or fear, everything softens. Life starts to feel less like a series of obstacles and more like an effortless flow. In that acceptance, you stop seeing life as something you must control or shape. Instead, you begin to see it as an ongoing dance, where you no longer have to fight the rhythm. You move with it, and in doing so, you find that the problems you thought existed are not problems at all. They are just part of the dance, moving with you. There is a curious belief we all hold onto that life should go a certain way. We create ideals of how things ought to be, and we judge reality against these ideals. We build structures in our minds of what is right, what is wrong, what is good, and what is bad. But in doing so, we forget one fundamental truth: life doesn't operate according to our preferences. It doesn't ask for our approval or permission to unfold in its own way. Think about this for a moment. We think we know what is best for us, what is the right path, what should happen next. But in truth, life itself is far wiser than we are. It moves in patterns that we may not understand at the time, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. The idea that there's a right or wrong way to live creates conflict. We impose this duality on the world, and in doing so, we blind ourselves to the possibility that things could just be neither good nor bad, neither right nor wrong, simply unfolding as they are. When we stop imposing this judgment, we stop creating problems. We no longer look at life and say, this shouldn't be happening, or this should be different instead. We begin to realize that life in all its forms is exactly what it needs to be in every moment. We begin to see that every moment is a piece of the greater whole, and what we once saw as wrong or unwanted is simply part of the beautiful complexity of existence. The need to control life, to shape it according to our desires, is the root of much of our suffering. And when we let go of this need, we begin to see that there is no singular correct way for life to go. There is only the path that unfolds naturally in front of us, and it's far more interesting and fulfilling than any path we could have planned ourselves. When we stop resisting life and stop trying to force things into the shape we want, something extraordinary happens. The so-called problems we thought we had simply begin to dissolve. You see, the things we call problems are often the result of our own resistance, our refusal to accept what is happening. We fight against reality, as though life were a puzzle to be solved or a mistake to be fixed. But in truth, life is not something to be controlled, it is something to be experienced. Imagine the moment you stop pushing against the current. The tension, the fear, the sense of struggle all begin to ease. The pressure to solve problems diminishes because you realize they weren't real to begin with, they were just reactions to your resistance. By letting go, the sense of urgency vanishes, and the situation becomes just another part of the flow of life. When you stop fighting, you open yourself to the possibility that the thing you were resisting might be exactly what you need at that moment. What you thought was a problem could be the very thing that propels you forward. that shows you a new path or teaches you something you didn't know before. And when you stop resisting, when you stop fighting, the solution, the answer, the clarity comes not as something you forced into existence, but as something that naturally arises from the experience itself. So the idea of a problem is less about the situation and more about how you meet it. It's your resistance that creates the sense of a problem. When you stop resisting, you see that there's nothing to solve. The situation just is, and you flow with it, not against it. The problem dissolves when you stop fighting it. What we often perceive as obstacles are simply the natural course of life. These moments, which we label as problems or challenges, are in fact an integral part of the journey we are on. Just as a river's path may twist and turn, encounter rocks, or face the resistance of a dam, the course of life is never a straight line. It's this very unpredictability that makes the journey rich, full, and meaningful. When we come across a challenge, it feels like something is wrong, like we've encountered an obstacle that we need to overcome. But the truth is, these so-called obstacles are merely invitations to grow, to shift, to evolve. Just as the river does not resist the rock in its path, but rather moves around it, life invites us to adapt and move forward when we face a challenge. These moments don't exist to stop us, they exist to teach us something about ourselves and the world around us. Imagine if every obstacle you encountered was seen not as a roadblock, but as a part of your unfolding journey. What would happen if you stopped seeing them as things to overcome and began to see them as necessary parts of the path, guiding you in ways you may not have understood before? Each obstacle, each challenge, is there to help you discover something new about yourself, to deepen your understanding of life, and to move you forward in ways that wouldn't have been possible without that encounter. In this way, life's obstacles aren't problems at all. They are stepping stones, not hindrances. They are part of the natural rhythm of life, not disruptions to it. And when you stop resisting them, stop fearing them, they no longer appear as problems. Instead, they become part of the dance, part of the flow, and part of the beautiful unfolding that is life itself. Fear is a curious thing. We often treat it as something to avoid, something that stands in the way of our peace and happiness. But what if fear is not an enemy, but rather a guide? What if the very thing we fear is the key to letting go of the idea of problems altogether? When we are afraid, we often cling to the belief that something is wrong, that we need to protect ourselves from danger, from uncertainty. But this fear, this resistance, only deepens our sense of separation from life. It's a signal that we are not flowing with the natural rhythm of things. Fear is the mind's way of telling us that we are pushing against life's current, trying to control it, trying to shape it into something comfortable. But life, like the river, doesn't conform to our expectations. It simply flows. Instead of fearing fear, what if we allowed ourselves to feel it fully, without judgment or resistance? What if we stopped trying to escape it and instead embraced it as part of the experience? Fear is not a problem. It is a part of life's dance, a natural reaction to the unknown. And in the unknown, we find possibility. We find growth. We find the freedom to let go of the need for control. When you face fear directly, without running from it, or trying to suppress it, you realize that it doesn't have the power to control you. It is not something to fight, it is something to be with. And in that acceptance, fear loses its grip. It no longer feels like a barrier, but a passage, a doorway into a deeper experience of life. In this way, the fear that we once saw as a problem becomes a catalyst for our growth and understanding. So when fear arises, instead of labeling it as a problem, see it as an invitation. It's life asking you to step forward, to let go, to trust that the river will carry you even when you can't see the path ahead. And in that trust, you discover that what you feared most was never a problem at all. It was simply part of the beautiful, unpredictable flow of life. When we impose judgment on life, we divide the world into neat categories, right and wrong, good and bad, desirable and undesirable. This habit of judgment creates a sense of separation, a sense of duality, and in doing so, it constructs the very problems we seek to solve. The world becomes a battlefield between what we want and what we don't want, between what we approve of and what we reject. But in truth, this division is an illusion, a mental construct that doesn't reflect the nature of reality itself. Life is not a series of binaries, of choices between two opposing forces. It is an endless spectrum of experiences, all of which are interconnected, all of which flow into one another. The sun shines and the rain falls. Day and night follow one another. Each has its place, and neither is inherently better or worse than the other. It is only when we start to judge one as good and the other as bad that we create a sense of conflict, the sense that something is wrong. When we stop labeling things, when we let go of the need to judge, the world becomes a more harmonious place. We cease to see life as something to be sorted into categories of right and wrong, and instead we begin to experience it as it is whole, complete, and ever-changing. Problems only arise when we refuse to accept life in its entirety, when we hold on to our mental constructs and fail to see the unity in all things. What happens when you let go of judgment? The pressure to fix things diminishes. The things you once thought were problems start to lose their power over you because they are no longer seen through the lens of right or wrong. You begin to see them as they truly are, just moments in the dance of life, no more or less significant than any other. In this way, judgment is the true source of many of the problems we face. It is the mind's way of dividing the whole into fragments, and in those fragments we create fear, anxiety, and conflict. When we allow ourselves to see life without judgment, we return to the unity of the present moment. And in that unity, there are no problems, only experiences, only the endless unfolding of life. You are not separate from life. You are not an outsider looking in, trying to fix or control things from a distance. The very essence of who you are is intertwined with everything around you. The river flows, the trees grow, the wind moves, and you are part of that same dance. This sense of separation, this belief that you are an individual struggling against the world, is an illusion. In truth, you are life itself, flowing and unfolding in perfect harmony with everything else. When we perceive ourselves as separate, we tend to view life as something we need to manage, to master, to manipulate. We see ourselves as a lone entity, isolated from the vast, interconnected web of existence, and in doing so, we create a sense of tension, of alienation. We begin to think that we must solve life's problems, fix its flaws, make it go the way we want it to. But the reality is, we are already part of it. We are not separate from life's flow, but an integral part of it. The more you resist the idea of being part of life, the more you create problems for yourself. When you let go of that resistance, you allow yourself to flow with the current. And in that flow, there are no problems, only experiences, some of which may be challenging, yes, but none of which are obstacles in the way of your happiness or peace. They are simply moments, part of the natural unfolding of existence. The real freedom comes from realizing that you don't need to fix anything, because there is nothing broken. Life, in its infinite complexity, is already perfect in its natural state. You are not separate from this perfection. The more you align with the flow of life, the more you see that all things, including yourself, are part of the same unfolding process. Once you recognize that you are in tune with life's rhythm, the sense of struggle fades away. Problems don't exist when you understand that you are life itself, moving through time and space with the same grace and inevitability as everything else. In this unity, peace is not something to be found, it is something you already are. You are not trying to control life, you are life, and in that you find the ultimate freedom. So, in the end, the idea that problems exist is just another story we tell ourselves, a story born from our need to control, to judge, to shape life into something it's not. But life doesn't need our interference. It doesn't require us to solve it or fix it. Life simply is, unfolding in its natural rhythm, neither good nor bad, neither right nor wrong. When we release our need to label and resist, we find that there were never any problems to begin with. What we called obstacles or challenges were simply part of the flow, guiding us, teaching us, and inviting us to see things as they truly are. By letting go, we open ourselves to the freedom of living without the burden of problems. We return to the simplicity of being, to the natural harmony that exists when we stop trying to change the course of life and instead allow it to carry us. In that acceptance, peace emerges not as something we strive for, but as something that has been with us all along.